Sir, the Affordable Care Act adds 12 years to the Medicare Trust Fund, according to every actuary, and the $500 billion represents a slowdown in the growth rate of Medicare over 10 years from what was projected at 8% to a growth rate
is it Medicare? Is it using it to save Medicare, or are you using it to fund health care reform? Which one?
Both.
The gentleman. So you're double counting.
Your chief actuary for Medicare said this, that cuts in Medicare, quote, cannot be simultaneously used to finance other federal outlays and extend the trust fund. That's your guy.
No, and what is absolutely true is that this will not solve our whole Medicare problem. We're still going to have to fix Medicare over the long term. What it does do is make sure that the trust fund is not going to be going bankrupt in 7 years, according to their accounting rules.
So you don't buy the CBO or the actuary, that you can't have it both ways, that you can't spend the money twice?
What is absolutely true, and what I do agree with, is that you can't say that you are saving on Medicare and then spend the money twice.
Well, Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius opened this debate again at a hearing, as you saw, on Capitol Hill. Privately, administration officials say Sebelius was not given time to explain fully the answer. And as you saw, the answer from the president back in March of last year. What about this? Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, at-large editor of National Review Online. Juan Williams, columnist with The Hill and Fox News analyst. And syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Charles, we'll start there.
Well, what you saw with Sebelius was the classic definition of a gaffe in Washington. A Washington gaffe is when an official accidentally speaks the truth. She was right when she said do both. This is double counting. If you cut Medicare by $500 billion, which is what the bill says it'll do, it won't, but let's assume it does. You can either set it aside and reduce the debt, meaning reduce the amount you have to borrow from China, or you can spend it on another entitlement, which is what the bill does, the entitlement that actually gives health care to millions of people who don't have it. It's one or the other, but it's counted in the bill as both, and that's why it's one of the many egregious accounting tricks. It's the worst. It's the way that Democrats ended up with the claim that you can insure millions of new people and reduce the cost, which a child will tell you is impossible because there are no free lunches. So this is the worst. And the president, he gave you double talk on the double counting. He never admitted it, but in fact, he never answered your question, how can you use it to extend a life of Medicare and use it to insure other people as a second entitlement? The answer is you can't.
Juan.
Well, the simple answer is that what we're up against here is an attempt to try to slow the rate at which Medicare would go bankrupt. And what the president is indicating and what Sebelius is trying to say when they say both is that most of this money really goes in terms of the health care reform bill to try to fund that bill. But in the process, what they're doing with health care is slowing the rate at which Medicare goes bankrupt. It's not, as the president said, going to solve the problem.
You're saying that they can do both.
They are, and it does do both. That's what it says.
But you can't use the $500 billion for both things.
If you're using it for one purpose, the primary purpose is health care reform. If that's the argument that people want to make and people who don't like the health care bill, fine, that's true. The money is going towards the health care bill. But it's also going to have the effect, the overall health care reform effort, of slowing the rate at which Medicare is bankrupted.
Well, one, you can either extend the life of Medicare by a number of years by using the $500 billion, or you can take the $500 billion and pay out. That's what the chief Medicare actuary said.
Well, what he's saying, and what I think the way that you are putting it, Brett, is quite understandable. But what you're saying is you spend the money for the chewing gum or you spend the money on dinner. You can't have the chewing gum and dinner. But it's not me saying it.
It's the chief Medicare actuary.
Right. And what I think...
And the CBO.
No, a CBO. The Congressional Budget Office says it will slow the rate at which Medicare is bankrupt. That's the whole point.
You're overdrawn at the bank. You can either spend the money to cover the overdraft or spend it on chewing gum. But you can't use the money to do both.
Jonah, help us.
I would be more sympathetic to Juan's position, which is sort of like the Yogi Berra line, and he came to a fork in the road and then he took it. But the problem is that, well, Charles says this is the worst fraud in the health care bill, and maybe he's right about that. The problem is it's not the only one. We had the Class Act. We've had now over 1,000 waivers given. Because it's becoming evident, more and more evident every single day, that the entire thing is a monstrosity, that it's unworkable. And what the Obama administration's position is at this point is to kick it all down the road past 2012 as much as they possibly can. And that's why they're giving out these waivers, which I think are of constitutional questionable status. That's why they're saying that the class thing is unsustainable. That's why Obama's position ultimately with the governors, as we saw a couple weeks ago, is to say, look, you have to buy the car of Obamacare, but we can negotiate about the options. And he's trying to be as reasonable sounding as possible to take this issue as much off the table between now and the election. But ultimately, the thing is just a clunker.
All right, just to be clear, are you saying that the chief Medicare actuary is wrong when he says that you cannot simultaneously use to finance other federal outlays and extend the trust fund?
Well, if he's
That's
thinking,
the CMS.
Here's the thing. Is he saying that he thinks the money is being used to finance Medicare? And if that's the case, then he's right. But I don't think that's what the Obama plan calls for.
Other federal outlays, meaning the health care law, payments out, and extend the Medicare trust fund. I'm just quoting from the CMS.
And all I'm saying is it's not about extending. If he's saying it's about extending, no, it's not about extending. It's about slowing the rate at which this is going into bankruptcy. That's all it's about.
Okay, last word, Charles.
$50 will either cover the bank overdraft or buy you dinner. It can't do both. If you try, you end up in jail. In Washington, if you try, you end up in a congressional hearing and you get away with it.
Up next, the president reverses course and resumes military trials at Guantanamo Bay. For more on that story, visit the show notes section at our homepage